Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Into part 1. The next morning, Emma woke up with a heaviness in her chest. The decision she made yesterday seemed even harder now. The mansion, her aunt's legacy, was more than just a house. It was a symbol of everything Emma had lost and everything she was trying to rebuild. She stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the sprawling estate. The golden light spilled over the manicured lawn, casting long shadows across the stone path leading to the front door. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Was this really her life now? She was about to marry a man she didn't know for a mansion she wasn't sure she deserved. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but the decision had been made. There was no turning back now. Emma had barely slept the night before. She tossed and turned, thinking about the strange man who was now a part of her future, Liam Carter. The man she was supposed to marry to keep her inheritance. She knew she had to meet him again today to discuss the legalities, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Would he even be kind? Or was he just as cold and calculated as the rest of his world seemed to be? She had so many questions, but no answers. She arrived at Liam's office, a sleek, modern building in the heart of downtown. The glass windows reflected the city's skyline, and the polished floors gave off a faint echo as Emma walked through the lobby. She wasn't used to this kind of place. She didn't belong here. She wasn't the kind of woman who had meetings in boardrooms or signed multi-million-dollar contracts. She was just Emma Brooks, a woman who had grown up in a small town with nothing but her dreams and a few sketchbooks. And now she was about to sign a marriage contract that could change her life forever. When she reached Liam's office, the assistant greeted her with a cool smile and led her inside. The office was just as imposing as the building itself. Dark wood paneling, expensive artwork, and a giant desk that seemed to dwarf everything around it. Liam was sitting behind the desk, his sharp suit and confident posture making him look like someone who was used to being in control. He didn't look up when she entered, his eyes focused on the papers in front of him. But when she sat down across from him, he finally met her gaze. Emma nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She had no idea how to navigate this situation. She wasn't sure what kind of marriage she was walking into, but she knew one thing. She had to play along. This wasn't about love. It was about survival. Liam's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest, as if he had been expecting this answer all along. His words didn't bring Emma any comfort. She was starting to realize that this was more than just a marriage. It was a business arrangement. And Liam wasn't just offering her a home. He was offering her a future, but only if she played by his rules. Liam's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. He didn't answer immediately, as if he was weighing his words carefully. Emma frowned, her mind spinning with a million thoughts. She hadn't expected that answer, but it didn't make her feel any better. In fact, it made her feel more like a pawn in some strange game. Her aunt had trusted her, but why did it have to be this way? Why did she have to marry a man she barely knew to keep the mansion? Just as Emma was about to speak, the door opened, and a tall, well-dressed man entered. His presence was commanding, and he didn't seem to notice Emma at first. When he did, he gave her a polite nod and took a seat next to Liam. Emma forced a smile and nodded politely, but the man's sharp gaze made her uncomfortable. He didn't smile back. In fact, he barely acknowledged her. It felt like everything about this arrangement was business, and Emma was just a small piece in a much larger puzzle. As the meeting went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, analyzed. It wasn't just about the mansion anymore. It was about everything else that came with it. As the meeting ended and Emma walked out of Liam's office, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to turn and run, to walk away from all of this. But the other part knew she had no choice. This was her future now. She had to see it through. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that marrying Liam Carter would change her life forever. She only hoped she was making the right choice. Into part 2. The days passed quickly, and Emma found herself growing more accustomed to her new reality. The mansion, once an imposing and intimidating structure, now felt like a part of her life. She spent her days exploring the grand rooms, learning about the history of the estate, and trying to get a sense of the place her aunt had loved so much. But despite the beauty and luxury surrounding her, something still felt missing. She had agreed to the marriage arrangement out of necessity, but as the wedding day drew closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was simply playing a role in a story she didn't write. Emma stood in front of the grand mirror in the master bedroom, adjusting the white dress she had chosen for the wedding. She hadn't felt excited, not even a little bit. This wasn't the kind of wedding she had imagined for herself. No dreams of love, no fairy tale romance. This was a business deal, plain and simple. And yet, as she stared at her reflection, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Was this really how it was supposed to be? She had agreed to marry Liam Carter to secure her future, but she had no idea how to navigate this world of wealth and power. She didn't belong here. Not truly. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned to find Liam standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo, his expression unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, and today was no different. He looked at her for a moment before stepping inside. The tension in the room was palpable, but neither of them spoke at first. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly masked the feeling with a forced smile. It wasn't love she felt, just a simple acknowledgement of the situation they were in. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady, though her insides were churning. He nodded, his eyes briefly scanning her dress before turning away. He walked over to the window, looking out at the estate. "This was never supposed to be about love, you know," he said, his tone matter-of-fact, as if they were discussing business, not their marriage. Emma felt her chest tighten. Of course, she had known that. She had accepted it from the very beginning. But hearing him say it so plainly, without any emotion, made it feel all the more real. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear those words again. For a brief moment, Liam turned to look at her. His gaze was intense, but there was no softness in his eyes. "Change is not something I'm looking for. This is what it is, Emma. It's a contract. Nothing more." His words stung, and for a moment, Emma wished she could just walk away from it all. She had been so sure of her decision, so certain that this marriage would give her the stability she needed. But now, standing here with Liam, it all felt so empty. She was nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But before she could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. The moment was broken, and Liam turned to open it. A staff member entered with a tray of champagne glasses, a polite smile on their face. Emma felt her stomach tighten. This was it. There was no turning back now. She was about to marry a man she barely knew, in a ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. As Liam took the tray of champagne glasses from the staff member and handed one to Emma, she hesitated before taking it. She knew she had to go through with this. She had to keep up the charade. But deep down, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was okay. The wedding ceremony was small but elegant. The guests were a mix of Liam's colleagues, business partners, and a few of his closest friends. Emma felt like a stranger in her own life as she walked down the aisle. Her heart was heavy with the weight of everything she was about to lose. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, it felt like a dream. A dream she was too afraid to wake up from. As they exchanged vows, Emma's mind wandered. She wondered if this was what her aunt had wanted for her all along. Was this the life she had hoped for Emma? A life of security, yes, but also a life of loneliness, filled with contracts and deals rather than love and companionship. Emma couldn't help but wonder if her aunt had ever felt the same way, trapped in a life that wasn't her own. When it was over, and the ceremony was complete, Emma found herself standing at the front of the mansion with Liam, the crowd applauding behind them. It was supposed to be a celebration, but all Emma felt was emptiness. This wasn't the future she had envisioned for herself. But as she looked at Liam beside her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for something more, even if she couldn't see it yet. End of part 3. The days following the wedding felt like a blur to Emma. The mansion, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a gilded cage. She had married Liam Carter out of necessity, but living with him under the same roof was a different reality. Their interactions were polite, formal even, as though they were still strangers bound by a contract rather than husband and wife. The house was vast, its hallways endless, and Emma found herself wandering through rooms that had once felt full of life, but now seemed cold and distant. Every morning, Emma would wake up to find Liam already gone. His work, or so he said, kept him busy, and when he did come home, he would disappear into his office, leaving Emma alone in the quiet mansion. At night, they would share a brief meal in the dining room, and then retreat to opposite corners of the house. It was as though they were two people coexisting in the same space, but never truly living together. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, Emma stopped at a small bench under a tree, the leaves rustling softly in the wind. She had been out there many times before, trying to find solace in the beauty of the place, but today, she felt the weight of her solitude more than ever. She had no friends, no family to turn to. Liam was a stranger, and though he was kind in his own way, it wasn't the same as the love and connection she had imagined when she was younger. Just as Emma was lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Liam walking toward her, his expression unreadable. For the first time in days, he wasn't in a hurry. He stopped in front of her, his gaze softening slightly. Emma blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in his demeanor. Liam had always been so controlled, so distant. She didn't know what to make of his words, but for a moment, she saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. It was brief, like a flicker of something real beneath the surface. Liam nodded, but instead of retreating into his usual coldness, he sat down next to her on the bench. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was just real, and for the first time, Emma felt like they were sharing a moment of honesty. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She thought he was just going to brush it off, pretend everything was fine, as he had done for weeks. But now, as he sat beside her, his words felt genuine. Emma looked at him, her mind racing. Was he trying to apologize? Or was he simply acknowledging the uncomfortable truth of their situation? She wasn't sure, but for the first time since their wedding, she felt like they were no longer living in separate worlds. Liam looked at her, his gaze searching, as if he was trying to understand her better. And for a brief moment, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But she quickly pushed that thought aside. This was still a marriage of convenience. Nothing more. As the days passed, Emma and Liam continued their routine. He would leave for work in the morning, and she would stay home, trying to find purpose in a life she hadn't chosen. She spent time exploring the estate, fixing up rooms, and rearranging things to make it feel more like her own. But the emptiness was always there, lingering in the back of her mind. It was only when they were together, at dinner, in the garden, or even in passing, that she allowed herself to wonder if something more could develop between them. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Liam sat with her in the living room, the flickering light from the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. It was one of the rare moments they shared without any formalities. They spoke about the house, the plans for renovations, and even about their pasts. It wasn't a conversation about love, but it was a conversation nonetheless. As the night drew to a close, Emma found herself staring at him, studying the man she had married. She still didn't know everything about him, but there was something there, a flicker of warmth, of kindness, hidden beneath the surface. Maybe it wasn't love yet. Maybe it would never be. But in that moment, Emma realized that perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps they weren't just strangers anymore. Perhaps, in time, this marriage would become something more than just a contract. End of part 4. The weeks continued to pass by, each day blending into the next. Emma and Liam's interactions had started to change in subtle ways. They still kept their distance, but there was a growing sense of familiarity between them. They began to spend more time together, sharing simple meals, discussing plans for the mansion, and even exchanging a few jokes. But despite these small shifts, there was still an unspoken tension in the air, a tension that neither of them seemed willing to address directly. One evening, as they sat in the living room, the silence between them felt heavier than usual. Liam had just returned from a long day of meetings and was sitting on the couch, flipping through some papers. Emma, who had been reading a book by the fireplace, watched him for a moment, her mind racing with thoughts. She hadn't realized how much she missed the connection she had with other people, real, genuine connection. But with Liam, it was different. There was something about him that made her want to understand him, to break through the walls he had carefully built around himself. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Emma put her book down and spoke, her voice tentative but filled with curiosity. At first, Liam didn't respond. His eyes stayed focused on the papers in front of him. But Emma could see the slight tightening of his jaw, the way he clenched his fists around the documents. He wasn't used to being asked questions like that. He wasn't used to being vulnerable. Emma hesitated, unsure of how to push without crossing a line. She had learned to tread carefully around him, to keep her questions within the boundaries of their agreement. But tonight, something in her felt different. She wanted to know more about the man behind the business persona, the man who was now her husband, albeit in a contract-bound sense. Liam sighed deeply, setting the papers aside and finally looking at her. His eyes were weary, as though he had been carrying a weight for far too long. Emma felt a pang of sympathy for him. It wasn't the answer she had expected, but it was raw and honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. Liam met her gaze, his expression softening for a brief moment. Then he quickly looked away, as if her words had caught him off guard. The conversation lingered in the air, heavy with the unspoken truths they were both reluctant to acknowledge. For a moment, Emma could see past the walls he had built around himself. She could see the man who had worked so hard to achieve success, but had sacrificed everything else along the way. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could help him find something more than just the life he had built around business and wealth. But before Emma could say anything more, the doorbell rang, cutting through the silence. Liam stood up abruptly, his expression returning to its usual guarded state. Emma stayed seated, watching him as he opened the door to reveal a delivery man holding a large bouquet of flowers. Liam accepted the flowers with a brief thanks, but Emma's eyes were already scanning the note attached to the arrangement. Liam paused, looking at the note before handing it to her. Emma took the note, reading the message written in elegant handwriting. To Liam, for all your hard work. Looking forward to future success. Alexander. She handed the note back to Liam, feeling the slight bitterness in the air. She wasn't sure if it was from the message itself or from the fact that he had once again prioritized business over personal connections. Liam didn't respond immediately. He simply placed the flowers on the table and sat back down on the couch. Emma's heart sank as she realized how deeply entrenched Liam was in his own world. She had hoped that, over time, they could build something real together. But with every passing day, she was beginning to see that he might never allow himself to do that. He was too focused on the future, too consumed by his work to let anyone, even her, in. And yet, a small part of Emma couldn't help but wonder if things could change. Maybe, with time, they could find a way to bridge the gap between them. But as she looked at Liam, sitting there so distant, she knew that for now, they were both stuck in a world of their own making. End of part 5. Weeks continued to slip by, and Emma was starting to realize that the distance between her and Liam was growing rather than shrinking. The mansion, once a beautiful and silent witness to her new life, now felt like a maze of loneliness. Liam's business trips were frequent, and when he was home, he remained absorbed in his work. There were times Emma would sit by the window in the living room, watching the world go by, wondering how much longer this charade could last. She had agreed to this marriage for the mansion, for the future her aunt had set for her, but as the days turned into weeks, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing herself in the process. One evening, as the sky outside the mansion began to turn a soft shade of pink, Emma found herself standing by the piano in the parlor, her fingers hovering over the keys. She hadn't played in years, but the familiar feeling of the polished wood beneath her hands brought a sense of peace. She pressed down a few notes, letting the melody fill the room, and for a brief moment, it was as if she had stepped into a time before all of this, before the contract, before the wedding, before the mansion. Just her, the music, and the life she had imagined for herself. The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Liam standing in the doorway. His gaze softened slightly when he saw her, but he didn't say anything at first. Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions, surprise, relief, but also a sense of sadness. He had become such a distant figure in her life that seeing him now felt like meeting a stranger. Emma smiled faintly, but the warmth didn't reach her eyes. "I used to," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "Before life became so complicated." Liam stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Life can be complicated," he said, his voice almost thoughtful. But we don't always have to make it harder than it is. Emma glanced at him, her fingers still resting on the piano keys. His words hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about everything, the life she had left behind, the life she was now living. And the man who stood before her, a man who had promised nothing more than a partnership in name, had started to feel like a ghost in her own world. Liam didn't immediately answer. He stood there for a long moment, as if considering her question. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, but there was something different in his tone. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Was this a change in him? Or was he simply acknowledging the discomfort of their arrangement? The vulnerability in his words caught Emma off guard. For the first time since their wedding, she saw a glimpse of the man behind the businessman. The man who wasn't just trying to maintain control over everything, but was willing to acknowledge his own mistakes. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. She could feel the tension in her chest, the ache of wanting something more, but being unsure of how to ask for it. She had married him for the mansion, yes. But somewhere along the way, she had hoped for more. And now, with the way things were, she wasn't sure if it was ever going to happen. Liam looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. But then, something in his eyes shifted. He stepped closer to her, and without saying a word, he reached out and gently took her hand in his. Emma blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. For a brief moment, she thought she saw the possibility of something more, but the doubt still lingered in her heart. Was this just another moment of weakness on his part? Or was this a real change? Emma pulled her hand away gently, the words echoing in her mind. Could she really believe him? Could she trust him enough to let go of the past and let herself hope for something more? She wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like there might be a chance to break free from the walls they had both built around themselves. As Liam turned and walked toward the door, Emma remained sitting by the piano, lost in thought. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing for sure. Things had to change. And maybe, just maybe, Liam was willing to make that happen. End of part 6. The days following their conversation were a strange mixture of silence and unspoken understanding. Emma and Liam both seemed to be walking on eggshells, trying to find a balance between the marriage they had entered into out of necessity and the possibility of something more. The mansion felt different now. It wasn't just a place she had inherited anymore. It was a home, a place where something was changing. But neither of them was sure exactly what that change would look like. Emma spent more time in the garden, trying to get lost in the beauty of the flowers and the quiet of the space. It gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. She would walk the long paths, her thoughts heavy with the questions she still didn't have answers to. Was it possible for her to stay in this marriage without feeling like a prisoner? Was it possible for her to really open her heart to Liam? And did he even want that? One afternoon, as Emma sat on the bench in the garden, sketching a few designs for the renovations she wanted to do to the mansion, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Liam walking toward her, his hands in his pockets. He stopped a few feet away from her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension from earlier still hung between them, but there was something different about the way he looked at her now. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say, but she nodded, silently urging him to continue. Emma felt a flutter of something in her chest. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Was Liam actually opening up to her? It was hard to believe after everything they had been through. But the sincerity in his eyes made her think maybe, just maybe, he was. Emma swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never expected him to say anything like this. Her mind was racing, torn between hope and skepticism. Was this the beginning of a real change? Or was it just another fleeting moment of vulnerability on his part? She wasn't sure, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it could be real. There was a long pause as Liam stepped closer, sitting beside her on the bench. He didn't say anything right away, but the quiet comfort of his presence was enough. They didn't need words to fill the space. Emma could feel the change happening between them. The shift from two people simply going through the motions to two people who were willing to see each other for who they truly were. Emma turned to him, her heart racing. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that had been so carefully hidden before. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something real. Maybe they could figure this out together. And for the first time since their wedding, Emma felt something stir inside her, a glimmer of hope, of possibility. Maybe this wasn't just a marriage of convenience. Maybe it was the beginning of something far more meaningful than she had ever imagined. End of part 7. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic between Emma and Liam began to shift. The walls that had separated them seemed to crumble bit by bit, and for the first time, they were starting to feel like real partners. Partners in a marriage that, while unconventional, was no longer just about obligation. It was becoming something deeper, something neither of them had expected. They began to share more, to communicate more, and, surprisingly, to care more. Emma found herself opening up in ways she hadn't thought possible. Liam, though still guarded in many ways, was becoming more present, more attentive to her needs, and more willing to let her into his world. They spent time together in the mansion, walking the grounds, discussing their hopes for the future. Liam's business trips were fewer now, and when he was home, he was more engaged with her, making an effort to truly connect. One afternoon, as Emma was in the library, going through some old family records of her aunts, she heard Liam's footsteps approaching. She had become accustomed to the sound of him moving through the house, and today, it didn't feel as intimidating as it once had. He knocked softly before entering the room, a quiet smile on his face. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. The smile she gave him was genuine, not forced, as it had been in the past. She didn't hesitate. As he sat down beside her, Emma couldn't help but notice how much more comfortable they had become with each other. There was a familiarity now, a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Liam didn't immediately speak, but instead, he leaned back in the chair, watching her with a quiet kind of admiration. Emma smiled, feeling a sense of pride as she explained her plans for the mansion. She talked about the renovations, about how she wanted to restore the house to its former glory, while also adding her own personal touch. For the first time, she was making decisions for herself, decisions that mattered to her, not just to Liam or to anyone else. Liam nodded, clearly listening, and for once, Emma didn't feel like she was just talking to fill the silence. He was genuinely interested in her vision. Emma felt a warmth in her chest at his words, a sense of approval that she hadn't realized she needed. Liam's approval, his acknowledgement, meant more to her than she had expected. It was a simple gesture, but it was also something she had longed for, someone to see her, to hear her, and to appreciate the work she was doing. Liam looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt meaningful, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared journey. Emma's heart fluttered at his words. It was a simple statement, but it carried so much weight. She had been so focused on the past, on the obligations of their marriage, that she had forgotten about the future that could still be theirs. Maybe they hadn't gotten here in the way she had imagined, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe they could build a life together, even if it wasn't perfect. She squeezed his hand gently, offering a small smile. I think that's all I've ever wanted, Liam. To build something real, something that's ours. For the first time, Emma felt a spark of hope that she had long since buried. Maybe this marriage wasn't just about duty. Maybe, in time, it could be about love. The kind of love that grew slowly, unexpectedly, but was just as real as anything else. End of part 8. As the weeks passed, Emma and Liam's relationship continued to grow, evolving from a marriage of convenience into something more meaningful. The walls they had once built around themselves slowly crumbled, replaced by an understanding that was built on honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect. They began to make decisions together, not just about the mansion, but about their future. Liam, who had once been distant and consumed by his work, now made time for Emma, time that wasn't dictated by business meetings or endless tasks. He had changed, and so had she. The house, which had once felt like a prison, now felt like a home. One evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, casting a soft glow over the garden, Emma found herself standing in the place where it had all begun, the bench in the garden where she and Liam had first had their honest conversation. This time, however, the air felt different. There was a sense of peace that had settled over them both. They had come a long way since the day they had gotten married, and Emma couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. She heard footsteps behind her, and when she turned, she saw Liam walking toward her, his usual confident stride now tempered with a sense of ease. He stopped beside her, a small smile on his face. Emma smiled and moved over to make room for him on the bench. She could see the difference in him now, the way he carried himself with a quiet confidence, but also with a gentleness that made her heart swell. Liam sat down beside her, his arm brushing against hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was a comfortable silence, one that felt natural, not forced. Emma leaned back, gazing up at the sky as the last light of day slowly faded, leaving behind a canvas of stars. Emma turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again, but his words were filled with sincerity. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I used to think that success was all that mattered. But now I realize that it's the people you share your life with that make it worth living. And I'm glad I have you by my side." Emma felt her chest tighten with emotion. His words were exactly what she needed to hear. They were no longer two strangers bound by a contract. They had built something real, something that had evolved into love, a love that had come slowly but surely, one step at a time. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded away. There was no mansion, no business contract, no expectations. There was just them, two people who had come together, learned from each other, and created something beautiful. Liam reached out and gently took her hand in his, the warmth of his touch sending a wave of comfort through her. "Emma," he said, his voice steady, "I know we didn't start out the way most people do, but I don't think it matters anymore. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not because of the mansion or the contract, but because of you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She had feared for so long that their marriage would always be about obligation. But now, in the quiet of the garden, under the stars, she realized that what they had was real. And in that moment, as they sat there in the quiet of the night, hand in hand, Emma realized that their journey was just beginning. The future they had once feared was now something they could face together, and it was full of possibilities. Together, they had turned a marriage of convenience into a partnership built on love, trust, and a shared vision of what could be. And, for the first time, Emma felt that the mansion was truly hers, not because of the inheritance, but because of the life she had built there with Liam. End of Part 9.